So let's talk about Kazakhstan. It's this absolutely massive nation, right at the heart of the Eurasian steppe. For thousands of years, this land has been a giant crossroads for empires, for cultures, and for some really dramatic changes. We're going to break down its incredible history right now.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to journey through 5 distinct eras. We'll start with the earliest people, see the rise of a powerful nomadic empire, then walk through its time under larger states, the tumultuous 20th century, and finally, its emergence as the modern nation we see today.
All right, so let's rewind, and I mean way back. The story of this land doesn't start thousands of years ago. We're talking over 1 million. This place was the stage for some of the earliest human activity, which eventually gave rise to the world's most influential nomadic cultures.
Now, while early humans were here 1 million years ago, a truly pivotal moment for all of human history happened right here, around 3600 BC. That's when the Batai culture did something incredible. They became the first people to domesticate the horse. Think about that. This one development would literally define life on the steppe for millennia, making everything possible: the mobility, the trade, the warfare of legendary groups like the Saka warriors who came later.
Okay, let's jump forward a bit. We're heading into the era that really forged the Kazakh identity as we know it today. And this story kicks off in the 15th century, right as the mighty Mongol Golden Horde started to splinter apart.
You got to understand, the Kazakh Khanate wasn't just formed, it was born out of an act of defiance. You had these two princes, Janibek and Kare, who broke away from the powerful Uzbek Khanate. They basically said, we're done with this, and went off to establish their own state, uniting all the nomadic tribes under one banner. This whole founding story, this drive for sovereignty, is a theme you're going to see again and again in Kazakh history.
And wow, did they become powerful. This quote right here from a historian back in the 16th century, it just perfectly captures the golden age under Qasim Khan. He expanded the Khanate's territory, created its first ever code of laws, and commanded an army so huge that his neighbors were, frankly, terrified. They became a seriously respected power across the entire steppe.
But you know how these things go. That kind of strong, centralized power is really hard to hold on to. After the peak under leaders like Qasim Khan, internal squabbles led to the Khanate splitting into 3 distinct groups. They're known as the Juz, or hordes. And this division, well, it really weakened the state, making it much tougher to face outside threats as a single, unified force.
And that outside threat? Oh, it arrived. It came in the form of the Dzungars, a powerful federation of Western Mongol tribes. The wars that followed were just this desperate, brutal fight for survival. In fact, the invasion of 1723 is still remembered in Kazakh history as the Great Disaster. And while heroic leaders like Ablai Khan emerged from the chaos, the constant conflict ultimately left the Kazakh hordes completely exhausted and incredibly vulnerable.
So this vulnerability, it really sets the stage for the next big chapter in Kazakhstan's story. Pinned between the Dzungars in the east and the ever-expanding Russian Empire to the north, the weakened Kazakh hordes started looking around for powerful allies, for protection.
Now, this wasn't like a quick one-and-done invasion. The absorption into the Russian Empire was this slow, century-long process. It started with the little horde asking for protection way back in 1730. Over time, the Khanates were basically dissolved one by one until a final major uprising for independence, led by the last Khan, Kenessary Kasimov, was crushed in 1847, and that pretty much cemented Russian control. And once they were under Russian rule, things changed a lot. The empire started encouraging huge numbers of Slavic farmers to move in and settle on the best grazing lands. This was a direct attack on the nomadic lifestyle that had defined the Kazakh people for centuries, leading to massive displacement and, of course, a lot of resentment. All that tension just boiled over and exploded in 1916 with a huge and brutally put-down uprising against a World War I draft order.
So you might think, okay, the Russian Empire collapses in 1917, so independence is next, right? Well, not exactly. Instead, what came next was an even more radical and, in a lot of ways, far more devastating period of transformation under the new Soviet government.
Right in the middle of all that chaos of the revolution, you had this amazing moment. Kazakh intellectuals formed something called the Alash Orda government. It was this brief, really hopeful attempt to create a modern, autonomous Kazakh state. But that dream was very quickly crushed by the Bolsheviks, who pulled the territory into the Soviet Union, which all led to the creation of the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic in 1936.
See, the whole Soviet project was about tearing down the old and building something totally new.
And for the Kazakhs, that meant a violent, forced end to a way of life that had existed for thousands of years. This policy of collectivization herded people onto massive, state-run farms and took away their livestock, the very foundation of their entire economy and culture.
The result was just an unimaginable man-made catastrophe. It's known as the Ashar Shlik. This famine killed an estimated 1.5 million people. Just let that sink in for a second. That was nearly a fifth of the entire Kazakh population at the time. Hundreds of thousands more fled the country. It was a demographic disaster that left a deep, deep scar on the nation.
For the next several decades, Kazakhstan's role within the USSR was complicated and often brutal. It became home to some of the most notorious Gulag labor camps. It was the primary nuclear testing ground for the entire Soviet Union and the home of the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the launchpad for the space race. Then in the 50s, the Virgin Lands campaign brought yet another huge wave of Slavic immigration. It got to the point where by the 1970s, ethnic Kazakhs were actually a minority in their own republic. The first real cracks in that system started to show in 1986 with the Zheltochsan riots, an early sign of the nationalist spirit that was starting to bubble up all across the Soviet Union.
All right, which brings us to the modern era. The Soviet Union is falling apart and Kazakhstan is facing this enormous task of building a brand new nation, pretty much from scratch.
So, as the USSR was crumbling, Kazakhstan started making its moves. Led by its first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, it declared sovereignty, and then on December 16, 1991, it became the very last republic to declare full independence. And one of the most important first steps it took on the world stage was to voluntarily give up the massive nuclear arsenal it had inherited from the Soviets, establishing itself as a peaceful, non-nuclear nation.
So after nearly 30 years with the same leader, the last few years have been a total whirlwind of change. Nazarbayev resigned in 2019, huge protests rocked the country in early 2022, and then, in a really symbolic move, the capital's name was changed back to Astana, all of it signaling that a totally new chapter for the country was beginning.
So, when you look at the whole story, what do you see? From the Saka warriors to the Soviet space program, the one constant in Kazakhstan's history is this incredible resilience. It's a nation that was forged in the very heart of Asia, and its future is probably going to be defined by how it balances its powerful neighbors while it keeps on forging its own unique, independent path in the world. Hey, thanks for sticking with us for this deep dive. If you want to get the rundown on other countries just like this, definitely check out our Quick Country Histories playlist. And of course, if you enjoyed this explainer, please subscribe to Notebook Summaries. It really helps a lot.